Welcome to the Work Done Right podcast, where we talk with industry professionals to discuss best practices in construction, manufacturing, and maintenance. I am your host, Wes Edmiston, Director of Product with Cumulus Digital Systems and 15-year construction industry veteran. Our guest today is Chiz Chikwendu. Chiz is the co-founder and chief technology officer at Cumulus Digital Systems, a construction software company that specializes in assuring work is completed right the first time, every time. Prior to his time with Cumulus, Chiz spent time working in aerospace, medical device engineering, and led the electrical engineering team at Shell's TechWork facility. Chiz holds an undergraduate degree from Yale, a master's in electrical engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and an MBA from Quantic University. In addition to all of this, Chiz has been a personal friend and coworker of mine for the past 6 years, where we work together, oftentimes on opposite sides of the fence, to deploy construction tech solutions on projects. Chiz, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Wes. It's good to be with you.
So when we first met, you were at the TechWorks site. But can you tell me a little bit about what it is that got you to that point? What got you into the construction industry at large?
Mentioned I was in aerospace, and I loved that job. Just really building planes, doing stuff on airplanes and things like that, and traveling. And left that job because I was moving to Massachusetts. Voila, I found a girl, right? So
it always leads back to that, yeah.
Always leads you back. So it was one of the two. So I said bye-bye to aerospace, came to Massachusetts, got married, and basically not long after that, medical device space, just really doing hardcore engineering designs. And I actually got recruited. So one of the recruits from Shell TechWorks actually wrote me and asked if I'd be interested in coming and checking out an opportunity at Shell TechWorks. And you wouldn't believe this. The day before that, I was hanging out with a friend, and he was like, "Hey, man, you should really think about working in oil companies." And I was like, "Why?" I'm like, first of all, they're in Houston. I don't want to move to Houston. I'm happy being in Boston. And I'm like, that's not going to happen. And then the following day, I get this email from this recruit. And I was like, oh, man, how prescient.
That's it, yeah. The stars just kind of aligned, right?
Just aligned. I was like, okay, this can't be coincidence, right? And then sure enough, the job was in Cambridge. I'm like, what's Shell doing in Cambridge? So that really got me interested.
I mean, it just kind of goes to show this is all a little bit destined to be, right? Whenever you were within TechWorks, you worked with a couple of different projects there as well, right? What was the focus of all of that work?
So the focus of a lot of the work that TechWorks was doing was essentially rapidly deploying new technologies in oil and gas. I used to think aerospace was pretty slow in adopting new technologies until I got to oil and gas. And the mantra, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, works really well in oil and gas because it's like lots of profit, but everything's working. We don't feel any pressure to change things. But as the late 2000s rolled around and efficiency became such a heavy thing everyone was considering given the economic outlook, folks started tightening their belts and trying to figure out how to leverage new technologies to actually solve old problems that we just kind of, left, sort of. And so TechWorks came to be, and we were looking at a host of problems like, how do you abandon wells? How do you figure out supply chain around, LNG shipments, right? System studies, looking for ways to optimize things and where you can bring in technology. And it was really cool because it was an eye-opener, and there's actually a lot of tech that goes into, oil and gas and at different phases.
So with all this experience you have with TechWorks, with what you've had with Cumulus, it just leads to the big question: how do you build, deploy, and scale a construction technology solution? In 3 words, how do you do
it? How long do you have?
Let's cover some of the high notes. How did this process go when you guys spun out from Shell TechWorks? So you were part of Shell TechWorks, you had the solution, and you spun out as your own product. What sort of lessons did you learn in that process? And even we could probably even take it back a further step of when you were in TechWorks, right? You said in oil and gas, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And there were a lot of lessons that you learned through that process. Do you want to go over what it was like, developing a product and deploying a product in the construction industry?
Yeah, I mean, like, where do you begin? It's never as simple as, hey, I have great tech that works. Hey, let's deploy it. There's a whole bunch of things that go into it. One, I'd give you an example that I personally worked on was something we called LIPS, right? And it had to do with leak interrogation path processing system. In other words, if you abandon a well, how do I make sure it's properly abandoned and there are no leaks, right? And so we decided that we were going to design a tube that actually has helium. If you know stuff about helium, it's not easily soluble and obviously floats to the surface. And then typically oil and gas wells don't have inert gases like helium, right? So if you abandon a well, which basically means you're shutting it off and decommissioning it, and you stick in helium at the bottom. If it bubbles to the top, then you know that you didn't plug the well properly. There's a leak somewhere. So that was the general idea. And so my job was to design essentially this slow release circuit. I'm trying to use a nice word that basically sits inside of this cylindrical tube that looks like a missile, but it's just has helium in it. And after a certain time, it releases helium inside of the canister, which basically gets pushed out to all the tubes and the annular surfaces of your well. And if your packer and your cement lining, which typically is supposed to adhere to the walls of the tube, if those things are not done properly, the helium, being really small, will find a leak path through that whole column of cement all the way up to the surface. And if you have a sniffer at the surface and you detect helium, then you know that you need to work to replug the well again. Now, the cool thing about that is it was supposed to save time, because a lot of companies, when they actually have to reserve money to in escrow to plug wells, so that when it's time to plug a well, you go to the money you have in escrow and you use it to plug the well, right? But that means big companies like ExxonMobil, Shell, or the oil majors have huge money in escrow that they can't use because it's geared towards abandonment. But if you figure out an efficient way to abandon wells and you can show repeatedly that you do it well, maybe you can have some of that money back.
One thing that I know you worked on quite a lot, because there I was on the other side of you, was when you guys were in TechWorks working on Smart Torque, right? And you took this and you deployed it on a couple of different projects. You deployed overseas first, right?
Yes. In Singapore, in Jurong Island.
Okay. What sort of lessons did you end up learning early on in that process of deploying, not even just in oil and gas, but in construction? How is it that the craft respond? How is it that management responded? What sort of things did you see?
Oh my God, you had to, get buy-in from the stakeholders at all levels, whether it was at the management level or at the craft level. Any one of those ones could sink your intentions to do something that you think is really nice, because everybody also has different goals. So the manager wants to see an efficient running plant and wants to make sure that turnarounds go smoothly. The craft is only doing enough work that they're supposed to do, and the manager of a craft is typically a contractor who wants to get paid. So don't make me change the way I'm doing things. Don't make me change my tools. Don't make me change the system. I've been doing it this way. I can price it adequately. Once you've added this element of uncertainty, I don't know how to bill you anymore. So it's not in my best interest to try to do something new, right? So you have to find a way to win on both ends. And then obviously there are the unique cultural communication issues that you have to deal with, because in America, for instance, in North America, when you're dealing with craft, you're dealing with people who are usually in trades. So there's a way to communicate when you understand that you're a craftsman who's been in the business, or a craftswoman who's been in the business in that trade for a certain amount of time with a certain degree of qualification and expertise. And then you go overseas, so somewhere in the Middle East or Southeast Asia, and you have guys that are just being pulled from different countries. You know, they were in a farm last week and they just got pulled in because, hey, labor is cheap and we're going to train you. We train you and voila, you might have never torqued a joint before, but here you are with this wrench and then go do the work. So that has its own unique set of challenges too.
Yes, there's a different level of competence barrier there.
Absolutely. And then you actually have to prove that your system does work and that, you know, it does what you advertise that it should do. And typically people want to see that there are nothing detracting. In other words, don't give me something that does really well. It does a specific job really well, but then it sort of detracts in a certain way. Maybe it takes a bit more time, or maybe I have all these aspects of things that I didn't used to manage before I now have to manage. People are usually like that.
Yeah. Actually, speaking from the first person perspective on that, you're absolutely right. Because even where it is, you know, we did a couple of time studies here and there just to know, right? So are we introducing new risk or are we not? Which you know, to break off onto that tangent, we could probably talk about that for a while. You know, I think that's one of the things that's actually hindering progress in a lot of areas is just, you know, risk tolerance, which I totally understand, But really, again, from the first person perspective, there were certain other areas that while we saw, yes, this is a great solution in the ways that you're telling me. Well, now we have new data questions that we never had before, and you gave me an inconvenience over here. You gave me more than a convenience over here. You helped me out over here, but this inconvenience over here, I don't know if I want to continue to use this just because of that. So it's that new sort of issue that was introduced very quickly put people off, right? Myself and you know, I know several others on project that are just, you know, very opposed right off the bat because it was something different and it took time to get over that. How is it that you see that projects can, I guess, kind of, you know, to get over some of these issues, you know, not just say, hey, deal with it, but how can we better manage some of these issues that come up, like data preparedness, data integrity, and what can providers like yourself do in order to ease some of that burden for projects?
And that's a great question. And honestly, it's not an easy answer, right? And you're going to find people who will say, yeah, I don't want to deal with it. But on the other hand, if you're willing to work with people and specifically different customers maybe have different pain thresholds, pain tolerance, and you are willing to provide any service that makes their life better. So in a specific use case, say like Elba use case, like where we work, right? We're like, okay, let's build a cabinet where you can manage your charging. You can manage charging for your tools and for your tablets, where you don't really have to worry too much about trying to figure out where am I going to put this? How am I going to organize it? So let's give you a platform to organize your equipment. So that's one way of trying to make the problem a little better for the customers, because you've now introduced a new set of tools that require things that old tools didn't require before, right? So that's one aspect. The other aspect is you want to ingest data in the system. That's always a problem, you know, training people early on how to ingest data. Like, well, we can do the first few for you. And part of, you know, doing that work is teaching how it's done. So you can take a valid input file and say, here, I formatted it, I've organized it in a manner that our system can more adequately ingest, and like, here it is. You can ingest it this way. Another way is, okay, well, I don't want to keep typing things in my app to really figure out what I'm working on. Can we make that better? Yeah, let's try to figure out how to create QR codes or some other way of preventing and minimizing that kind of work that you didn't have to do before, so it's not as onerous as it might seem.
Hey, real quick, this is Wes. I just wanted to let you know that if you have an idea for an episode topic or a great guest suggestion, we would love to hear from you. Just send us an email at workdoneright@cumulusds.com. Now, back to the show. I just kind of took it for granted whenever I was on Elba, for instance, about the cabinets that y'all built and provided to us to help keep everything stored and organized and charged, and that it is that you were being proactive about, hey, we identified this is a new problem, but we're going to solve this problem for you, which something that you'll hear oftentimes on projects is, don't come at me with a problem, come at me with a solution, right? And you guys took the opportunity in order to say, hey, you know what, we see the problem, we're going to just give you the solution right off the bat. Don't worry about anything else. There were instances that I saw, and I'd like to hear what your perspective was, about kind of gaps in communication between understanding, right? So you graduated from Yale. I, at the time, had very little college education, and I was a construction worker. Built myself from the trades upwards. We spoke entirely different languages. How is it that you found that you've been able to communicate with some of your customers to better improve projects? Is there a technique that you all use, or is there anything that you do in order to help maybe clear up some of these gray areas?
Institutional education is not the best indicator of intelligence. You know that. So there are people who are very intelligent. They can assimilate data. They can, they're quick thinking on their feet. They can be forward looking and forward thinking and understand how to translate certain things, ideas and concepts into reality. So A, you're humble. B, you try to understand the problems and the ways of working of your customers, understand what their needs are. And then when you understand those parameters, you can tailor your language around those needs, those ways of working. And then you also learn their own terminology. And as much as those terminologies can apply to the things that you're doing, you use that same terminology.
So that's through you were in TechWorks, you're deploying these technologies, new technologies, and it was really on the cutting edge of construction tech. That was 2016, 2017 timeframe. There weren't a lot of technologies that were out there, and then you all spun out as what you are now, Cumulus, as the vest suggests, and the sign behind it shows, right?
Absolutely.
So what were you most surprised at whenever you spun out as your own company? You're starting to interact more with some of these other companies outside of just shell projects. Were there any personal challenges that you faced, or was there anything that was surprising to you with some of these other companies?
Coming up to speed, first of all, was something that I needed to do rather quickly. And what I mean by that is knowing enough to ask the right questions, to make sure the right people were doing the right things, right? So that was a challenge. The other challenge is from the board perspective, right? If you're totally tech focused and you don't have an idea as to how the business market works, or let's just say the other legs of a company, right? When you're in a C-suite, it's not just enough to be technically savvy. You have to be business savvy. And so I had to begin to sort of expose myself once again. So again, hence trying to get the MBA at Quantic, understand these things so you can have the same language to communicate with. So as you're doing that, then there are new things that you're open to. Things like, okay, you're now responsible for security of the platform. So that's a different arena that you didn't have to worry about before. Somebody else had to do it because it was a CIO's job at Shell to make sure that you were, following the industry best practices. Here we are, a small company that now has to play big, because when you're playing with folks like Shell or ExxonMobil or the other ones, one of the first things you're going to have to do is to answer these security questionnaires that basically wants to know how your platform is built, how it's organized, not only about your technology, but really your company practices. What is your security posture? How are you thinking about threats? How do you respond to things like those, great business threatening events? Do you have a business continuity plan? How do you recover from disasters? Okay, so you're having these conversations with customers. So it's no longer just about how good your software is, it's about how good your company is.
There's a phrase that one of my old project managers, Mark Hales, if you remember him, would say quite often, right? The known unknown. There's a lot that we know that we don't know. We just don't yet know what it is. So, I guess to continue down this timeline, one of the things that happened pretty shortly after spinning out as your own company is the project that you and I were on for quite some time, which was PenChem, right? A big facility in Western Pennsylvania, where we went through, I think, something along the lines of around, in total, about 300,000 work completions, which was a big project. What was the biggest lesson that you learned during that? For your product, for your company?
The best thing PenChem did for us was it forced us to become a disciplined company, right? Because it's not normal for a startup software to be playing in a regulated industry where there are rules, and that typically means money. When you're going to be compliant with regulations, it costs you money to demonstrate your capability and your compliance from a third-party perspective. So, that's one thing that I wish I kind of thought about more in terms of what it was going to mean for us to get to that place where we became as disciplined as we needed to support PenChem, right, adequately. So, as you know, we had problems with scaling. Right? We had been dealing with, systems that had up to 10,000 joins, maybe not more than 50,000 work completions. Here we are, multiplying that 10 times, right? So, and we had initial trouble just trying to scale. And part of it was technical because of the way our initial architecture was built. So then trying to maintain that service while building a new architecture and performing, a seamless lift and shift was really, really hard, especially with the limited resources we had. It's not like you had tons of money to go hire a whole bunch of people, to help with that problem. You had your small team. And so at different times, I sort of had to carve certain people out and say, this is what you're going to work on. Just focus on that. And I'm going to take all the crap work so you can focus on doing the really good work.
Yeah, because you're right. Anytime anything would go wrong, we blame you 100%.
Absolutely.
Is there anything that you would say most surprised you in the industry, as far as, when going on these implementations, when creating these new technologies? What do you think has been the most surprising aspect to you, really about construction and construction tech overall?
I would say it's I don't know if reticence is the right word, but the slowness to adopt new technology. I was surprised by that, right? Even in data center construction, people are still building things almost
same way it's been going since the 60s, right? That's how construction is largely, right?
And I was surprised about that because coming from an aerospace background, I was like, yeah, aerospace is slower, at least in my experience, to adopt new technologies compared to medical device. And they're both regulated industries. But the thing with aerospace is, hey, a plane goes down, it's not one person, it's a ton of people, and it's usually very loud. So everyone makes sure that whatever it is that you do is fully tested, fully vetted with tons of paperwork backing it. So the willingness to do things that are new comes with a huge cost that you have to have, really, really weighed before you, take on that adventure. You just ask Boeing, and they'll tell you. You and I went out to a data center fair, and just thinking about the construction and the conference and some of the ways that we're building things, we couldn't believe it. Right, we couldn't believe it, and I was like, I thought oil and gas was slow, and these guys are even slower. So that's the surprising thing to me.
It is surprising, just if you really think about, it's 2023, right? That how much society and civilization and technology has advanced, everywhere else in the world over the last 20 years, 30 years. It is surprising, at least, especially as of 5 years ago or so, just how little construction had advanced, really overall. But with that said, kind of thinking about that point, what is it that the industry could do from your experience, right? From your perspective, what is it the industry can do to better enable these innovations to be deployed on projects? What can they do to better adopt these technologies?
Honestly, maybe a harmonization of standards is one way. Because when everybody knows this is the standard you have to design to, then there's a drive for conformity. Now that sounds like a big stick approach, thou shall, but it's usually effective when it means trying to get everybody to do certain things, right? So that sort of big stick approach helps. Now, outside of, let's say people coming down and driving a certain sort of standard, saying this is the way you do things. Outside of that, making it easier and cheaper to integrate technologies is another way that we can begin to sort of bridge that gap. And part of the things that maybe enable ease of use or ease of adoption is having conformance between different platforms. Say you are building something new and you're using, a BIM 360 model, for instance, and you want to use that for capturing all sorts of information like tools and 3D models of different parts of your plant and actually model everything to the T. Now that's great. Now it'd be good to have integrations where, hey, I want to run a heat flow analysis, or I want to run a CFD analysis because I want to figure out how certain things flow around here or there. Or, hey, I want to integrate with some work management tool, where I want to grab the data and have real-time information as to what's going on in the field. Now, that'd be great. So if there are interfaces and formats that allow information like that to become more and more plug and play, then it's easier to adopt new technologies, in the field. Then also the other thing that helps is having data connectivity. So in my experience, most construction sites, when you're building, unless you have LTE enabled types of equipment, it's hard to have connectivity. Now with LTE enabled equipment, that means that all of your devices are on some phone plan that becomes pretty expensive. But if you have a lower cost way of connecting things, in your own site, then that's great, because now you can share data. And obviously having smarter and smarter tools, if you start using smarter and smarter tools, you can get information that you didn't have before. You can make better decisions that maybe you weren't in a position to make because you just weren't seeing things.
By making all of this data more usable and useful, that people will begin seeing these benefits and they'll continue to adopt these platforms just to keep it going, right? Because from there you'll be able to make better decisions. We'll start aggregating more and more past data. We'll be able to go through and assure that our bids are more accurate, and it's really exciting to see, honestly. With that, what is, of the technologies that are upcoming for the industry, is there one that stands out to you that is most appealing or most interesting?
Honestly, I'm going to go back to my aerospace days. It's the idea that everything can be modeled, right? So we think of it in construction as, digital twin, right? So to me, digital twin has a great potential to really, really shift how we do things, make designs more accessible, easier to change, easier to, to recognize where there are problems, and easier to fix, or quicker to fix, get a faster turnaround. And there's great traceability in that. And, with that, you could even have multiple integrators more easily work together if everybody's supposed to be able to work from the same source of truth. So if that can happen, that makes a huge honestly, it's a huge change. Imagine if builders who are not the same as designers can grab the same models as you're making changes, and they can figure out where things are supposed to be or what's happening. Imagine how quickly you can turn around certain things. I mean, like, there are other technologies that are also cool, like AR, VR. I just think with AR, VR, it's another way of going back to models, if you will, or, capturing the same information that models would capture, except obviously you have a 3D visualization, you feel like you're there. So that's good, but from the base level, I think everybody working to model-based design is, I think, core.
Yeah, and modeling all components, right? There's a lot that's left. A lot of projects, they already use a 3D model, but there's still so much that's field routed and a lot of information that's just left out of the model that by enhancing the information, not only that they put into the model and begin with, but also that we aggregate throughout the build process, we can really make it a lot more usable and, again, useful. We're looking like we're coming up on our time, so we're going to switch over to our rapid fire questions here, Chiz, just to get to know Chiz the person rather than Chiz the CTO. So Chiz, where is your favorite place you've traveled to?
Oh man, I'll give you two answers. For work, it's been Singapore. It's fascinating for me, having been in Singapore, seeing that side of the world and the way they do things, and just how nice and neat and organized things can be. And then with family, best vacation was in Paris. So the whole idea of being together with family and going down to Seine or seeing the Eiffel Tower or the Champs-Elysees, that really was cool. Yeah.
No, that sounds like a fun vacation. Cats or dogs?
Neither.
You're revealing a lot about yourself here, Chiz. What one word best describes you?
Everybody tells me I'm nice, so I would say I'll use that. Nice.
What's your favorite book?
Favorites. I don't do well with favorites. But one book that I read recently that I really liked is Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. So I just think it was awesome the way he, with his research, sort of crafted a narrative.
I've had that book recommended to me actually multiple times now, so I should probably give it a read. What is since you're so good at deciding favorites, what's your favorite movie?
Oh my goodness, I don't have a favorite movie, but there's one movie that I'd watch anytime it shows up, and it's Bourne Identity series, whichever one. I would always watch those.
All right. What is your dream job?
Oh my goodness, building anything that has me building and traveling.
Yeah, I think that you're in the right industry for it. Chiz, if you could have dinner with any one famous person in the world, living or dead, who would it be?
I would have been interested in sitting down with Lee Kuan Yew, who was once the Prime Minister of Singapore, because I really want to know, as a builder, again, how did you take Singapore from where it was to where it is?
So, Chiz, that is all I have. I really appreciate you joining us today on the podcast. It's really enjoyed the conversation. So look forward to catching up again soon.
Same here. Thanks.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this episode of the Work Done Right podcast. Please help us out by subscribing and leaving us a review. And as always, our show notes are linked in this episode's description. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.